Okay, this is the intro for the podcast.
Welcome back to the Silver Screen Fiends podcast. I am your host, Sam, and it is that time of year. Nope, not the season of spook. Nope, not your grandma's lasagna. It is Noirvember. Beautiful Noirvember. What's Noirvember? You watch film noir in November. How clever. Anyway, for my yearly wrap-up, I have back a guest that needs no introduction, but we could give it to him anyway. He's Anthony.
It's me, Anthony, Retro Roulette's very own.
And I'm
What's up, Sam?
You know what? A lot. The sky, my blood pressure, but I'm feeling good.
Well, now that I took a puff of that inhaler, now my blood pressure's probably through the roof too. And God bless these things, really.
Not sponsored.
So, I before we get started, I just have to say I much prefer Noirvember to No Nut November.
It is a lot more fun to engage in.
I completely and wholeheartedly agree.
So, again, we've done a couple of these. We just watch a bunch of noir, and we talk about them. We've done it for a few years, and we're probably going to do it for many, many more. So, I guess we could just dive into it. I don't have much housekeeping this week. I usually do a little housekeeping. The boys and I are just working on some new content. Look forward to that. Movies suck. Beans, thelobster.com. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, time for the juicy stuff. That's right, film noir. I feel like we always discuss the definition on each episode we do. I guess we'll just touch on it real quick again. It's a cinematic term, and it is a very weird, broad generalization of films that took place between like the 40s and the 50s. Highly stylized, exaggerated, dealt with sex and mystery. Oh, you're setting the mood. Oh, man. Wait, let's see how that looks on my end. Oh, man, we're setting the mood for Noirvember.
I like this. I think I'm going to keep this.
All right, let's do it.
I think also for the rest of the interview, I'm going to talk like this, see?
Whatever your vocal cords can handle, my friend. So
Noir, that one's a lot easier for me than some of the other ones I do.
So the thing about noir is that it's such, like I said, it's such a broad blanket term for movies that really just deal with like overly stylized crime dramas. They deal with nihilism, cynicism, sexual. I can't even say innuendos. It's just like flat out sexual themes. And there's usually a femme fatale. There's a lot of dynamic lighting. So there's a couple constants in the genre, but for the most part, it's very generic. So that's why, like, Anthony and I, for example, get into a lot of discussions about what would be considered film noir and what is not. Because the truth of the matter is you really don't know. There's no concrete definition. So, but this is why I like talking about it, because it encompasses such a spectrum of cinema that it's always fun to just see what other people think about the genre. So I know that you initially got interest in this through a film class way back in the day. I did not attend a class like that, but I just kind of became a cinematic loser and dove into a whole plethora of films. And film noir is something that when I first discovered, I felt weird about it. I thought that it was a little cartoony in a sense, but
it very much is.
But upon exploring it, I've spent many nights just looking through YouTube. I'll get recommended films. They'll have full uploads. Don't ban me. I'm just the viewer. And they show just all these weird, obscure noir films. And that's kind of how I fell in love with it. And my first real foray into it, which ended up being my favorite film and one of the greatest film noirs, is The Maltese Falcon. So that's one we will discuss now because I showed Anthony that one. We basically just showed each other a bunch of films, and that's what we're going to discuss.
Yeah, I'm glad you're starting with that one because I remember hearing that Maltese Falcon is like the apex, like the number one noir film. Everyone must see it. It is the film that sort of defines the genre.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know if I agree with that. Like,
interesting. Okay.
No, don't get me wrong. The movie's very much a noir, but there's just something about it that was a little, I don't know, borderline cartoony.
Yeah.
Like you said earlier that noir could be kind of cartoony, but like this one was just, it also kind of has a happy ending. And like one of the things for me with noir is like I expect a tragic ending when it comes to noir, and to me that is something that's more associated more closely with the genre than something where it ends with, you know, the good guy catches the perp and puts him away, you know?
Well, I do sort of agree. What I will say, though, is that I do feel like the ending is not so much a happy one, but a morally positive one. Because Sam Spade, I guess this is a good place to just launch into the film. So, The Maltese Falcon has an all-star cast. We got Humphrey Bogart as Sam Spade, who's a detective, whose partner gets killed in the first 10 minutes of the movie. And then we have Mary Astor, who plays Ruth Wonderly, who's basically like the femme fatale. And we have Peter Lorre as Joel Cairo, who, first of all, one of my favorite actors and one of the antagonists, but is really the helping hand because Sidney Greenstreet, who plays Casper, ends up being the big daddy of everyone. And they're all after...
Big is an appropriate word for that character.
Exactly. And this is great because there's so many layers to this because they're all after this one thing, the Maltese Falcon, and there's such a deep level of constant betrayal in this movie that sometimes it's almost hard to follow what's happening, which is kind of another consistent theme in film noir, is that the story is so layered. If you blink for a second, you're gonna miss an important plot point. And
that's actually something that, as somebody with ADHD, I struggle with the genre because that's not just something. I turned the light back on just because, you know.
Yeah,
the joke
because
the joke ran its course. But the thing about that the genre where you have to be paying constant attention, for somebody like me, it can be a little draining, but at the same time I love it.
It's
very
draining.
Strange.
Yeah.
It's very strange because there are so many details, so many clues that these movies give you, and in Maltese Falcon especially. That if you blink, you miss a massive part of the movie or something incredibly important to the story.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those things where I truly like love and hate that about noir, and especially the pacing. Like the pacing in Maltese, what I felt was very fast. It's just a very fast-paced film.
Yeah.
A lot happens in that, what was it? It was an hour and 40-minute runtime or something.
Yeah,
like
about that. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot happens in that movie.
Yeah, sure. And to add to the whole cartoony aspect, it's not necessarily indicative of what I'm about to say, but it's an interesting comparison. The fact that this was distributed by Warner Brothers, and this was around the time of the golden age of animation, where you have all these Looney Tunes cartoons being produced by Warner Brothers. And I've always found certain parallels between Bugs Bunny and the Humphrey Bogart character. And I don't know if
that's a good comparison.
And I don't know if Mel Blanc intended to capture a little bit of Bogart, but it certainly seems that way. And I think they almost use that to their advantage when creating these films. So, especially when you have people watching them that have such an imagination that runs rampant, you start to see parallels between reality and fantasy. And it almost becomes like a Who Framed Roger Rabbit syndrome. But I think that that's an interesting argument to have, and not one that I thought we would. But yeah. So anyway, Humphrey Bogart, Sam Spade, detective, has a partner. Femme Fatale comes in, brings him a case. Nothing is known about her. She's super secretive. As soon as she shows up, that's when all the trouble follows. Sam's partner gets shot. He gets blamed for it. Peter Lorre shows up out of nowhere, demanding the Maltese Falcon. Then all three of the characters end up converging. And then we have Sidney Greenstreet, who you find is really behind the whole operation. And he's willing to pay a lot of money to get his hands on the Falcon. But one of the things I really like is in a lot of crime films, especially from this era, they usually they never glamorize the criminal. But you assume in a crime film that the head of the syndicate, quote unquote, is really the big boss and the big brains, and he's got all of this money, and he's got tact, he's got couth, but in reality, they're pieces of shit. So, like Casper in this movie, he's really not as wealthy as he's letting on to be. He's just somebody who's so corrupt with greed that he's willing to put anything on the line to get this bird, including Wilmer, who is played by Elijah Cook Jr., who's essentially his lackey, his gunman, who tails Sam Spade throughout the whole movie. And so that adds another layer, because at first you think it's a red herring, but he actually ends up being tied to Casper's organization, rather. So,
right.
And it's just, there's so many puzzle pieces that are trying to fit at the same time. And Bogart's constant quick wit, he's just got this machine gun rapid fire of dialogue. And it's something that, again, you got to pay attention to, but the payoff is tremendous. Because if you really pay attention and dissect it, you don't even know who he's trying to fool in that moment. He plays so many hands simultaneously. He's like the master of deception. He's probably like the most deceiving person I've ever seen in a movie. And he's also one of the first recorded anti-heroes in a movie, because they have you believe at first that Sam Spade is straight up good guy, but then he sort of does things. He plays the field in a way that sort of keeps him a little bit like a mercenary, but then he goes back to good, and it's kind of like this constant teeter-totter game of good versus evil. And that's a message that I'm really down with in film noir and crime in general, is that there's really no good and bad. It's just
humanity.
It's
just, really
yeah.
It's
exactly.
humanity. It's humanity at its lowest and at its highest.
Exactly.
It is a genre that is not afraid to explore the darker side of humanity and really get into the nitty-gritty of what makes us tick. And that is something that I really fucking enjoy about that genre. The funny thing that you mentioned this, with Maltese Falcon, there's a billion things going on at once.
Yeah.
And one of them being Bogart's character constantly keeping the viewer guessing as to what he actually wants and what he's going to achieve. And like what it ends up being at the end of the movie is probably one of the best plot twists I've seen in cinema, in any movie. The entire time you're thinking he's going to kind of just take the money for himself.
Yep.
Or he has the Falcon for himself. Or like just end up becoming a dirty investigator or whatever. But he doesn't. He avenges his partner, who when he died he didn't seem at all choked up about at all.
Yeah.
But it was just, it's a masterful play on his character, because at no point during the movie does he really show any signs of character development. He seems to be a very well-established character. He knows who he is and he knows what he's about.
Yeah.
Throughout the entire movie, until the very end, where he shows his hand and he shows his cards.
Yep.
And then lays it all out on the table. And then you kind of look back at the whole movie and you realize he's just been playing everyone for the right reasons the entire time.
Including himself, really, because toward the end of the movie, the love interest played by Mary Astor, she's trying to, so at the end of the movie they have them, obviously fucking spoilers, no shit, but at the end of the movie,
can you really say spoilers for a movie that's over 80 years old at this point?
Cover your bases. So there's a scene where he's explaining the situation, how he's gonna turn her in and how she's gonna essentially get the chair. If she's lucky enough, she'll do like $1.25. But he's explaining that it goes further than that plot device at hand being the Falcon. And
right.
It's the fact that he is a person who has been through so much, has never really showed anyone who he truly is. So in that final moment, he does open up a little bit about the situation, about how he did actually start to harbor feelings, because we have somebody who's so sheltered and is so deeply rooted in reality that you never know what could make the man tick. And sure enough, he opens his heart just a tiny bit, just a crack, just enough to let the viewer and the love interest understand where he's coming from and how he's been constantly fucked over and how it's all about greed and humanity. And the way they play the whole greed card is very crazy too, because they become ravenous over this Falcon. They really
fucking do. Like you Fat Man. He's the throughout the entire film up until the very end, he's this calm, collected character.
Yeah.
Who at all times everything is a fucking joke to him except the Falcon and his desire for it. Even when Bogart's like, when they're all together and Bogart's like fucking threatening him or whatever, he's sitting back in the chair laughing, going, "Oh, you're a very interesting character indeed.
I like a man who likes to talk."
And he doesn't give a fuck about anything except that bird. And the moment there's potential that he could be having it, you're like you said, he becomes ravenous. You see him sweating, you see him shaking, you see him breaking down.
Yeah.
Every instinctual ounce of greed and like desire that this character has just spills out onto the table at that point. And he's just, he can't like wait to get his hands on it. And when he finally thinks he has it, the expression on his face, the everything, it's almost like he's a completely different character at that point. And it just goes to show you the mastery of these charades that these characters play with each other. It's fantastic.
And I think that Caspar is one of my favorite characters because he exudes such a calm, collective mentality and portrayal of his own self, and he's somebody who obviously gets down to the point very quickly, but also is seemingly shrouded in mystery. But the way he psychologically nitpicks and breaks down a character, like, he's so vague about certain things, like when he's just making conversation with Sam, like, "I like a man who likes to talk. I don't trust a man who doesn't like to talk." And then he just like goes into the, "All right, let's cut the bullshit. How much, or like where, or how, or why?" And
he contradicts himself constantly.
It's exactly, and I think a character like that, it's very interesting because you see him breaking down in real time. He's somebody who's trying to keep his head, and you think he's got a solid plan going, and then it just crumbles the fuck down. And it's great because I think that was really his first big role, and he started acting at 61 years old. And
wow.
that's crazy because that cool, calm, and collected charisma he exudes in the movie, you would have thought he was like a well-seasoned vet in the industry. And I got a hand to everyone. This is an all-star cast. I mean, Bogart, where the fuck do you begin with Bogart?
People have written documentaries on the guy.
Yeah. And Peter Lorre, my favorite Hungarian sweetheart. And Green Street and Elijah Cook Jr. and Mary Astor, and it all just comes together in this big, beautiful melting pot of a movie that has you guessing 3 ways to Wednesday. And it is such a fun film. It doesn't matter what genre you're into. It's just fun. It's just like watching a comic book unfold.
It really is. It's fantastic. And I wanted to make this point earlier. I just want to jump back to it real fast. What we were discussing about Casper's character. Remember how I mentioned that like it all you see him like physically unraveling when he gets his hand on the Falcon, and yet the moment he realizes it's a fake, you see him like sweating, exhausted there, and then immediately you see them go from this to this.
Switch turns
and
back on. Yep.
The collective, calm, cunning bastard just comes right back. And it was when I saw him do that at the very end of the movie that I realized that like that's my favorite character in this film. One of my favorite characters in Noir, actually, just because he's such a different kind of crime boss.
Yeah. Exactly.
Very different,
he's not conventional.
Very different breed, and one of the most dangerous breeds are the ones that play the gentleman game.
Yes, absolutely. That's what I love about it too. It's very, very fucked up. But yeah, so Maltese Falcon, an obvious 5 stars. I'm glad you finally got to see it.
I am too. I've been hearing about this movie for close to 10 years now, and I haven't seen it.
And now that changes.
Oh dear.
I think
I shifted and now I'm not in the frame anymore.
Oh dear.
Gonna have to. It's a tiny webcam from like 2011. There we go. All right. So what's next on the itinerary there, good buddy?
So, as we're on the topic of Bogart, and this is the next one we watched, let's talk about Key Largo.
So I'm going to start with this. I gave this some thought. I gave it a lot of thought.
Uh-huh.
I think out of all of the movies we watched, this one was my favorite.
It's a solid choice to be your favorite.
It really is. When you have Edward G. Robinson and you have Humphrey Bogart in the same movie, and they're playing off of each other like this, I really gave it some thought, and even though this one has what is hands down the happiest ending out of all of the ones we watched, I think this one was my favorite because this really was a movie about a bunch of has-beens in a hotel living in both the past and the present simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
Everything from the old man, the old crippled man, to Johnny Rocco, to Bogart's Sergeant. They're all living in the past.
Yeah.
But they're all very much living in the present too. And it's trying to survive in this world that they find themselves in now. And it was just a phenomenal movie from front to finish. I think I really truly think that this one was my favorite because it was just a roller coaster and you never really knew what was going to happen next.
Yeah.
Because the moment you think you've got Rocco figured out, he goes and he fucking does something different than you expect him to. And like his character being, when he's first introduced, this big name crime boss, and then you find out that he's such a fucking coward.
Yeah.
He's just this scared child.
Yeah.
That is just, and you consistently see him just devolve and break down as the movie progresses. It's fantastic. So, yeah.
Yeah. So
sorry, I didn't mean to start us off like that, but
no, that's
I really gush about this movie, and I know we have that joke that's come out of it, but jokes aside, like I really thought about this one, and I really like this one.
Yeah, well, first of all, once again, you have an all-star cast and crew. You have John Huston, who directed it, who also directed The Maltese Falcon, which I forgot to mention,
that makes sense.
Who became a staple and almost the pioneer of American film noir, and went on, ironically enough, to become the main antagonist in Chinatown with Jack Nicholson. So you have this guy who is such a master in the craft of film noir, and he goes on to be the big baddie in the neo-noir of Chinatown. So we have John Huston directing. We got Bogey once again playing Frank McCloud, not to be confused with Fox McCloud.
Hey-ya!
And he's a World War II vet, and he found out that his war buddy died. And he goes to Key Largo. Yeah, F in the chat. And he goes to Key Largo to pay his respects, and he runs into his wife, Nora, played by Lauren Bacall, who was Bogart's real wife, which is always interesting in a movie when they cast the couple. And so they actually did a couple movies together. They did The Big Sleep, which I actually wanted you to see, but we'll watch at a different time. But that's another rapid fire movie. And then, of course, we have the illustrious Edward G. Robinson, who can play any role he ever desires.
He really fucking can.
He goes from pussy boy to crime lord to shit shoveler. His range is fantastic.
To master detective.
Get to master detective, yeah. Like Double Indemnity, really.
Double Indemnity.
Yeah. So
little guy right in here.
Yeah, it's like concrete. I gotta go to the pharmacy for something. So yeah, like you were saying. But to build on that, he goes there, pays respects, and they run this little hotel. James Temple is that crippled father who's played by Lionel Barrymore of the Barrymore family fame. I really like his movies, and the interesting part is you're led to believe this is just like a visit to this little hotel in Key Largo, and he'll probably pay his respects and then hop on the next plane back or whatever mode of transportation he had. But then the hotel slowly gets taken over by a bunch of these mobsters. And Johnny Rocco finally reveals himself, and I think the first shot of him is in a bathrobe. Which is really interesting because it right there, it already breaks down his character quite nicely. Yes. You have somebody who thinks he's the shit, but he's clearly living in his head and in the past. Right. So yeah, what's terrifying about this movie is that this is all about human nature. There's no big, I mean, there is a counterfeit subplot involved where he changes out money with a bunch of his crime buddies. But other than that, this is just mano y mano. This is just a game of gangster
wit, really.
Chicken. And it's a matter of who's going to make the next move. Because there's been plenty of times in the film that Frank, played by Bogart, has an opportunity to kill Johnny Rocco. And vice versa. There's plenty of times where Johnny, because he has a short temper, obviously.
Yes.
He will fly off the handle and he'll get close to pulling the trigger. But you know that they're now all in the Stockholm syndrome situation, and they kind of need each other to get through the night, because simultaneously there's a terrible hurricane brewing out there. And through this, like Anthony was saying, you see Johnny Rocco's character and who he really is, and he's nothing more than a coward,
frightened child, really,
and,
just like a scared 12-year-old, spoiled, and used to getting everything that he wants. And when things don't go his way, that's when this kicking and the screaming and the threats come out, and
Yep.
like willing to put anyone else in harm's way to get what he wants, until suddenly he's the one in danger, and now suddenly he gets it. He gets why people are afraid of the storm, or afraid of the situation.
Yep, and the best part about that situation is once they realize how afraid of he is, especially the father starts prying on those fears, and he starts egging him on. One of the best parts of
the entire movie.
And he's telling him how last time a storm of that magnitude blew in, the whole town got completely destroyed. And he's like, that won't happen. He's lying. That would never happen. He's like, right. And he's just shriveling.
And he talks to his henchman, and his henchman turns and looks at him and says, no, I read about that.
Yeah, and obviously made him feel even worse, and he gets to the point where he needs distraction. So he tells his henchmen, he commands them to start talking casually. And to me, that was one of the funniest parts of the movie, because you have this crime lord who's scared shitless of a storm, and he goes to his henchmen and says, come on, start talking. It's like,
I mean, to be fair, Tree did come in through the window, so if I were in his position, I would have probably been equally scared, but at the same time, I'm not a crime lord.
Exactly. You're not somebody who claims their shit don't stink. So it's a very comical situation. And a lot of these noirs end up portraying a certain level of black comedy, and that's also what I really like about them, is because sometimes it's direct, sometimes it's inadvertently funny, and I think both ways it works perfectly. So for
kind of like
Largo,
the movie Parasite, that movie is not supposed to be funny, but to me it was hysterical. Like, it's that sort of thing. Like you go into watching Key Largo, and I would imagine that if you were watching this in the 40s when it first came out, you probably weren't laughing. But here in 2020, when everyone has a morbid as fuck sense of humor, you find yourself laughing at a lot of it. Like, not because of the cheesiness of it or anything like that, but because everyone's got a really dark sense of humor these days. And some of this shit that happens in this movie is really fucked up, but it's kind of funny at the same time.
Sure, like when Johnny gets spit in the face by Nora. Like, that's funny, but in the moment, like if you were in the theaters
terrifying.
in the 40s,
you fear for her life.
Yeah, you would have thought she would have got shot in the fucking face. But
or like how Grandpa or the dad in the chair, he's not afraid of Rocco at all. He does not give a fuck if Rocco shot him in the face in retaliation. At some point, it kind of became a game. Like if Rocco shoots Grandpa, then that means Grandpa wins.
Right, and even I really love the fact that he gets so angry with him that he and the father is, I think he's paraplegic or he's crippled, and he
can almost kind of walk. He's got some kind of physical impediment.
Yeah, he's deteriorated, but he gets out of the wheelchair long enough to challenge Johnny because he knows he's a weakling. And unfortunately, that's when he falls over, but you can tell the kind of spirit that the father has. And that was a nice moment, even though it made you feel bad inside, because you know he's got this fighting spirit inside of him, this indomitable spirit.
You want to know what else was a really nice moment in that movie? Probably one of the warmest moments in the entire movie lineup that we watched for this. When Bogart's character is meeting with the widow and his comrade's father, and he's telling the story and how he knows a bunch about them and things like that. Like, that sort of warmness is both really sad and really beautiful, and was one of the most human moments in that movie. And
Yeah.
that's saying something, because that movie is a lot of humanity. But
Yeah.
um that really it's one of the warmest moments I've seen in a movie, period, because like I felt something inside. I could almost visualize this character that we never see, because he's already dead by the time the movie starts. It's just a fantastic moment, and it really speaks to the quality of the acting back then.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. But yeah, Key Largo is, and this is a movie that I didn't realize existed till my mom showed it to me years ago.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, and I finally dove into it thinking, oh, like my mom, I'm sure she's watched a good movie or two in her day, but how good could this be? And I sat there after my first viewing, and I just thought, wow, this is. I feel like more people should be talking about this one.
I agree
So,
with you 100%. I'm honestly surprised that one never came up in the class I took. But for all I know, I mean, really, I cannot remember most of the movies I watched in that class at this point. I mean,
yeah,
that's going back over 7 years now. But you know, that movie in particular, Key Largo, has to be one of the best noirs ever made. I really feel that it has to be.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. Speaking about a movie that never gets discussed, and I'm gonna skip the one we watched after this, but oh wait, by the way, I think we owe it to the viewers to explain the joke in Key Largo that we always reference.
Yes,
so
and you also, in the description of this video, absolutely need to link to the alternate ending.
Yes, I will do that. So towards the end of the movie, Frank ends up jacking one of the guns from one of the henchmen, and Johnny forces him Johnny forces him to pilot a boat out of Key Largo so that they can get to their destination. So Frank agrees, and he starts, steering the ship. And as this is happening, he starts picking off the henchmen one by one. And so at the end, Johnny's the only one left, and Bogart's hiding in the top, and you see Johnny freaking out behind a door, and he's going through the 5 stages of grief simultaneously.
Yeah, it's true, because he's
basically just
fucked.
bargaining and pleading and angry and sad and frustrated, and so over and over he keeps referring to Frank's character as soldier. And so he's saying, all right, soldier, what, you trust me, right? All right, I got a gun, I'm gonna throw it out now, soldier. All right, soldier. And so he just keeps saying soldier over and over again. And Anthony and I just fell in love with the phrasing because him in that transatlantic accent is just, it's so fucking funny. It's cool for the time, but it's just so funny to look back on now.
Looking back on that accent that was spoken nowhere in the United States of America other than in the movies.
Yeah, pretty much.
But
so yeah.
And if, in case you don't know, the reason the transatlantic accent exists is exactly for that reason. A lot of settings in these older movies were supposed to be kind of ambiguous. So the reason the transatlantic accent exists, it was so that people really wouldn't be able to pinpoint where it takes place, because the setting, the where, didn't really matter. It's supposed to be present day Crimesville, Slum City.
I'm pretty sure they even sometimes taught the accent in schools.
They did teach the accent in school. Yeah. That's correct. They did teach that accent to so that everyone would talk the same way.
Yeah.
I always found that funny. I really hate about older movies is that they all sound the same. They all have that transatlantic accent, and all the women, they all sound like this. It's so exaggerated. I'm like, Jesus, you can't tell. Like for me, especially with the problem. It's a problem with the female characters, or the women characters, I should say, in these older movies. They all sound the same to me, and if they didn't have different faces, I wouldn't be able to tell them apart.
Fair enough. That's a fair gripe to have with the films. But I was going to say that I wanted to skip the next movie we watched to talk about an underrated one, which is Scarlet Street. And this also stars
That was my
Edward
second favorite movie in the lineup.
And this was also Edward G. Robinson, directed by Fritz Lang, who to me was one of the greatest German expressionist actors and one of the greatest directors and just one of the greatest directors in general. I mean, if you look at M with Peter Lorre, and that's his first talking film, and just to see, oh, I gotta show that to you one day. But Fritz Lang has had such a range. It's just called M, yeah. But he started out in silent film, and and a lot of film noir comes overseas, and American filmmakers started taking notice of how Europeans and other countries were filming, and they took note and copied some of those techniques, and that's why film noir really came to be. And so Fritz Lang, to me, is one of those pioneers of film noir, and Scarlet Street is a prime example because it's a story that in writing seems like pretty blasé, but it's so layered and it's so tragic. It's just like a tragic love story where
I think what you mean to say is Simp Street.
It's yeah, exactly.
I couldn't help it.
So we have Edward G. Robinson, who plays Christopher Cross, which is also an interesting reference because Chris Cross refers to the method of murder where you find somebody and do their murder and vice versa, so they can't trace them back to you, which is featured in.
Wait, hold on. So you confirmed that his name is that because it's a Strangers on a Train reference?
Well, why else would it be Chris Cross?
Well, I don't know.
That's too coincidental.
I thought Strangers on a Train came out after that movie. Let me just double check real fast.
Well, I feel like Chris Cross was probably a concept. So was Strangers on a Train, is that the only movie to talk about Chris Cross?
Yeah, that's the only time I've ever seen it referenced.
Oh, that's interesting because I thought that,
So Strangers on a Train is 1951.
Yeah.
Scarlet Street. 1945. So Scarlet Street came first. So if anything, Hitchcock got the idea when he heard Chris Cross's name and said, "Oh, you know what? That gives me an idea."
I like it. Well, either way, he plays this very straight-laced good guy, and he's just basically, when the film starts, he's receiving a gold watch for, I don't know, I don't think it's for retirement. I think it's just he's just being acknowledged for his good work. And,
right.
And they're singing like
being
for
commended by his company for exemplary work as a cashier at the bank.
Yeah. So, and you see, he's just like a very wholesome person, but it's interesting. They omit some information in the beginning as far as his character goes, and once the plot really goes on, you'll see it. But then we have Joan Bennett, who plays Kitty. This movie made me hate the word kitty, and she is, when you see her, Chris notices that she's seemingly getting robbed and abused by this taller guy. And so he runs over and he hails down a cop, but the guy runs away. And Chris is like, okay, do you want me to walk you home? And then they get a cup of coffee, which actually leads to a drink. And Chris is head over heels for Kitty at this point. He really wants to be with her every second of the day. But then you cut back to two alarming facts. Number one, Chris is married.
Right.
To a treacherous woman. Her name's Adele. This movie also made me hate the name Adele. And you find out that her ex-husband, well, seemingly it's implied in the beginning that he died in action, but the fucked up part is she keeps,
I guess you could say he was a soldier.
Yeah, soldier. And the fucked up part is she keeps a giant portrait of him in the living room. So just think about that. You're with someone who you're married. Yeah, a little bit of a red flag. You're with somebody and they have a big portrait of their ex just on in their living room. Like, come on. So you just see very quickly who's wearing the pants in the relationship. And you can tell Chris is he's abused. He's abused.
She actively, like, psychologically abuses him in this film. Like, you see it multiple times.
Yeah, he's abused. He's tired. He's tired of this life, and obviously anybody would be. Nobody should put up with that. So on the other side of the coin, Kitty, so that tall guy that Chris rescued her from, his name is Johnny. A third name I've grown to hate because of this movie. You basically hate all the characters. This movie
makes you hate a lot of names.
It does. And Johnny is actually the love interest to Kitty, but he is a complete scumbag. He's always trying to scam people, get $1, get a cent, get a nickel. He doesn't give a shit, and he abuses Kitty the same way Kitty abuses
Sounds like a SoundCloud rapper
Chris.
we both know.
Exactly. There's this chain of abuse. It's like a love abuse triangle. And Johnny doesn't give a fuck who he hurts in the process. And there's a scene where he literally, like, they wake up and you could see there's liquor bottles strewn across, clothes on the ground. And before Kitty awakens and leaves the bedroom, Johnny is literally dumping her purse to collect coins, to collect change, because he's so much of a cheapskate and so much of a piece of shit that he treats it like it's normal, and Kitty accepts it as normal behavior because she's madly in love with Johnny. And that's an interesting dynamic of the movie, is because there is essentially this love triangle, and although it's a central focus, you tend to not think about it too much, how there's this hierarchy of hate, and because of that. And this rings true in real life. It starts at the top. When you get somebody who's just greedy and corrupt and powerful, it trickles down. So they bitch at the assistant, and then the assistant goes home and they bitch at their spouse, and the spouse bitches at the child, and the child takes it out on the pet maybe. And it's a cyclical cycle, and it's cynical cycle, and it's very real. And that's one of the things that I love about the movie. So, but to go back to the actual plot, Chris is an aspiring painter. He paints all the time, and he does a damn good job at it. But obviously, Adele is not approving of his artistic ability. And Kitty sees this and thinks that he's a big shot painter the way he talks. Because Chris he's trying to hype himself up, you know? He's trying to allude to a character that he's sort of created in his mind. Like, he's not letting her know that he's just a random banker. He's like, no, I'm a painter and I make money off this. So Kitty runs with that concept and says, oh, so you make big bucks, huh? Then goes back to Johnny, and Johnny's like, okay, how do we exploit this quick? And then it becomes this whole crazy masquerade of money-making schemes where Kitty just forces Chris to pay for an apartment to where he could paint and shit, and then Johnny just like takes all the money from them, and they abuse all of that situation. And then basically we'll skip to the great payoff, which is Chris finds out that his paintings were being sold. They were being flipped under Kitty, forced by Johnny, because an art collector comes by to this random guy's stand where Johnny was selling the paintings, and they fall in love with them, and so they track them down, and Johnny says, oh, there's the artist right there, and points to Kitty. And so now everyone thinks that Kitty is the artist. And so when Adele is walking down the street, she sees Chris's paintings in the gallery window and goes in and freaks the fuck out. Her face was actually one of the funniest parts of the whole movie because she just stops. She's like, and just like runs into the fucking gallery. And Chris finds out about this, and you think that that's where he turns around completely, but he simps once again.
It's Simp Street, the movie.
And chooses to believe that this is just, oh, you know what? Like you're the victim now. But then he comes back to the apartment and overhears. Well, actually, so right before that, Adele's husband actually is revealed to be alive and tries to blackmail Chris, but Chris says, "Oh, well, if you want money, your wife's got money. You could just go get those bonds from your insurance policy she collected." And I remember you being really confused at that part, and inside I was like, "Oh, I don't want to reveal this because it's so good." And he takes him back to the house. And he's like, "Oh, yeah, it's right in there. Like, Adele's out, so don't worry about it." And the husband walks into the room, and you just hear fucking screaming from the room. So he packs up his bags and goes to the apartment that he got for him and Kitty. But when he goes there, he overhears and sees Kitty and Johnny kissing. And so he freaks out about this, goes and gets drunk, then comes back, confronts Kitty, and sure enough... Chris fucking snaps and ends up killing Kitty. And
he only snaps as bad as he does because Kitty fucking not only confesses, but she mocks him. She mocks him to his face. And like there's only so much abuse the poor guy could take before he'd snap. And he hit his breaking point at that point. And he snaps and he takes this ice pick and he violently stabs her to death. And then, as fate would have it, Johnny arrives drunk and in a rage because he's upset that Kitty blew her cover while he was around. And he gets framed for it.
Yep.
And gets the chair for it. So
yep.
Johnny gets killed. Kitty gets killed. And then Chris gets away with it. So you're just sitting there like, all right, so happy ending, right? Wrong.
Nope.
And that's one of the things I really appreciated about this movie is that you see Chris haunted by his actions, attempt suicide, and then eventually go from, in the beginning of the movie, a relatively well-off banker to a homeless man wandering the streets as a ghost of his former self. And that is how the movie ends. Yeah. And it is hands down the darkest ending that we had in this entire what would we call this, a watch along, 5 movie watch along or whatever that was. Yeah. So
it's actually one of the saddest endings I've ever seen in a movie.
Exactly. He doesn't even get the release can't even confess because and all he wanted was to be happy.
Yeah.
That was literally the only thing he was guilty of, was just wanting to be happy. And you see him go from being stable and safe but miserable to miserable and having nothing. And it's terrible.
And he can't, and so the ending takes place 5 years after the events of the film, and he can't confess to it. He keeps trying to go up to the same police officers saying, "I did it, I killed Kitty and Johnny," but no one believes him because the evidence, the case was played so well in Chris's favor that nobody believes it. There's nothing circumstantial about it. So he is doomed to a life of complete misery and heartache. And that to me is why this movie just deserves so much more attention than it gets.
It really does. It blows my mind that when you told me that no one talks about this movie, I was like, really?
Yeah.
Edward G. Robinson as the main character, and what is easily one of the most fantastic plots, going from watching a good man go bad and
Yeah.
and just crumble to nothing.
Yeah, it's really a testament of human will.
If that movie, I guarantee you, if that movie got made in this day and age, critics would call it a masterpiece. Everyone would talk about it. It's like, you know what it is? It's similar to Citizen Kane in the regard of, you have this character who has money, who has a stable life, but he can't be happy. And everything he does to try and be happy makes it worse until eventually, in the end, he dies unhappy, or the story ends with him unhappy.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a lot of parallels to a film like that, and the overall divine comedy of human tragedy really reigns true in a movie like this. It goes beyond corruption and greed.
Right.
It's about triumph of the will. It's about how far are you willing to go to attain that happiness. And it's really, really powerful stuff. So Scarlet Street, straight up 5 stars, no question about it.
Oh yeah.
Straight up. So that's another fun one for the kids. And
it's a great family film. That actually was my first pick. Like, I was gonna say that one was my favorite, but between that one and between Key Largo had the memes, and I just gotta go with the memes.
Gotta go with the memes. I completely
So I think
understand.
I think at the end it was our little internal Soja joke that kind of pushed me towards Key Largo being my favorite, but Scarlet Street is very much a close second. Like, I enjoyed that movie thoroughly.
Yeah, it's all around it's just a great character study on humanity.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
It's another genre defining film, and that's why it surprises me to no end that nobody talks about it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe now more people do, but certainly when I watched it, I couldn't find many people discussing it. So definitely 5 stars. That's that.
Yeah.
So next one we got is another Fritz Lang one, and I purposely wanted to tie each selection together. You'll notice that there's a pattern here that I chained the movies together. And because Fritz Lang also directed this next one. And this is one that was very obscure to me, and I didn't even know that I was going to like it as much as I did until I watched it. But now we're back to the whole detective landscape here. And we have a detective played by Glenn Ford. Sergeant Bannon, I believe his name was. And there's, in the beginning of the movie, it sort of opens like an episode of Columbo, where you see the crime take place, and then the rest of the movie they're trying to figure it out. So in the beginning, there's a police officer that seemingly commits suicide, and his wife is left at the scene, and Detective Bannon is starting to see that there's more to the story than that. And as he tries to poke and prod the dead horse, so to speak, people start coming out of the woodwork and saying, "Hey, don't put your greasy mitts there, or you're gonna regret it." And
turtle who sticks his neck out gets it chopped off there. See?
Yep, and it basically goes from this mob-connected mistress to he finds out that the corruption leads from the police station back to this kingpin called Mike Lagana, who appears later in the movie. But the interesting thing is, you're led to believe it's going to start as a straightforward detective noir, and he's just going to find all these pieces of the puzzle. But Jocelyn Brando, who plays his wife in the movie, who is the sister of Marlon Brando, is the main love interest. She is the wife, and they have a very happy marriage. They get along, and Banyan is a very stone-faced kind of guy. He doesn't really express a broad range of emotion, and you can tell that he's genuinely happy with his wife and his daughter. And tragically enough, halfway through the film, his wife gets blown up in the car because they put a bomb in the car thinking that Banyan was gonna go in the car. And so they meant to kill him, and they killed his wife instead. And so for the rest of the movie, he becomes a free agent. He becomes this rogue. Nobody's on his side. He turns in his badge. He's like, all right, fuck off. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. So the next half of the movie becomes this whole vigilante story. And they mark him for death. He essentially becomes... there's like a bounty on his head at this point. And Lee Marvin... who plays Vince Stone, is also in cahoots with the whole operation. He's just this rich dude who wants to also see him dead, and it becomes this whole big showdown between a bunch of people. And one of the best parts of the movie to me is Marvin's character has this the one of the other love interests. I guess you would consider the femme fatale, played by Gloria Graham. She's involved with Vince, and he treats her like complete shit. And as Banyan tries to extract information, he comes in contact with her. I believe they end up at a bar where there's an altercation, and Banyan's there, and he breaks it up. And when he leaves, Gloria Graham's character Debbie, she follows him. And it's sort of like this puppy dog treatment. She follows him, is like, well, I want to know more about you. And they try to get they try to put this love interest into the film, but Banyan's not having any part of it. He just wants to get down to who killed his wife, and he wants to take everyone down. So,
well, that's the way I see it, is that like there was a love interest. That love interest has been removed from the picture, and now he's going to go all John Wick on anybody who gets between him and whoever killed his wife, and he does. Like he gets really intense with everybody who gets between him and, I think Banyan is his name, Vince.
Oh no, well, Banyan is, that's Glenn Ford's character.
Okay.
Vince Stone is Lee Marvin's character.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, I know you said that that she's the one that the girl who was with Vince, that she's the femme fatale, but really to me it was always more of the wife of the guy who shot himself in the beginning of the movie. That to me, she seemed more of the femme fatale to me.
That's interesting. I mean, I think that to an extent she was, but really Debbie was the link between both worlds. And I think it was interesting that she kept trying to understand Banyan and get to know him, and it became this whole subplot until the end of the movie. And it's actually it's tragic, but it's also heartwarming, where she ends up caught in the altercation, and she's basically what's assumed to be on her deathbed, and she's trying to get Banyan to open up and tell her about his wife, and he finally cracks open his shell, his stone-faced shell, and he starts describing the things that she liked and the things that he liked about her. And it was a sweet way to end the movie, but
it really was.
But I think that this one was definitely more obscure. I do really like it. I liked all the other films more, but I think that what Fritz Lang did here was super great. I think that there's a lot of cynicism in the movie and a lot of violence. I mean, in the same movie, you have this innocent housewife getting blown up in a car. You have Lee Marvin throwing a boiling hot pot of coffee in a woman's face. You have him slapping women the whole movie. I mean, this is for all intents and purposes, this is a pretty fucking violent movie for the era.
Yes,
Like this,
and especially the violence towards women in this movie was
Yeah.
really unprecedented for the time.
Mhm. And I've noticed that in film noir, they balance out the playing field. They'll show more men hitting women and women hitting men and men killing women and women killing men. So it's like a more
it does kind
level
of
playing
equalize the
field.
genders there.
Yeah. So, but yeah, this one is great. I would say there's probably other ones I would put in the front line to recommend for film noir.
Yeah,
but
I'll be totally real with
movie.
you. This one was actually my least favorite of all the ones we watched, which was crazy to think because Lang also directed Scarlet Street, which I ended up liking so much more.
Yeah.
So much more than this one. But that isn't to say that this was a bad movie, but I feel like this one I had the hardest time keeping focus, paying attention to it. There were just parts. I think what bothers me most about this movie is that like there's this massive undercover crime thing going on with this corrupt politician that is a huge point of this movie. That even from the beginning, our main character has this massive like stick up his ass when it comes to the politician, the crime. He calls them thieves.
Yeah.
But the movie never specifically states what they did or what the crime plot is or what's going on. And to me, that's a very big part of a noir. I need to know the deets. I need to know the juicy little tidbits of information of why what they're doing is against the law and what crimes they are committing. That's important to me because then it helps me understand what is at stake. And I understand that the stakes are more personal in this movie, but still, it's something. I felt like it was just a really weird and off-putting thing to omit intentionally.
Yeah, I certainly understand how you feel. I think me personally, what saved that for me was the fact that the second half of the movie turned into like you so appropriately put it, a John Wick type film, and that became the overarching story. It became a revenge story. So
right,
the whole crime part, definitely it would have helped if they elaborated on the plot, but I also think that it worked so well because it flipped its head. The story went from detective to revenge. So I think that personally for me, that's why it worked. But I will agree that it's definitely the weakest out of the ones we watched because the other ones are just so much more prominently up my alley as opposed to this one. But Fritz Lang in general, he just has a way with his films. They always seem like they're in a dreamlike state.
very surreal.
It always seems like they're in a fever dream. Like you don't know where the line between reality and fantasy actually starts and ends. And I think that that's another part of the exaggeration that ties into film noir. And I think that's why I respect the genre even more because it's not cut and dry. There's so many avenues you can explore. It's basically like a play your own point and click game, even though it's linear, but there's so many layers to it that you're trying to decide like what the fuck is actually going on. So Big Heat, definitely a solid movie. There's others I would recommend over it, but I think it belongs in the conversation.
Oh yeah,
There's something about it that ties me to it.
I mean, there's a lot of use of shadows in that movie. There are a lot of noir aspects. I mean, it is a noir through and through.
Mm-hmm.
It has its happy moments, but it is deeply rooted in tragedy, and it definitely belongs on that list. It definitely belongs in this discussion, especially when you compare, like when you and I watched it, we watched this first. We watched The Big Heat first, and then we immediately watched Scarlet Street. And you told me that you thought that Scarlet Street was worse than, well, not worse, but you told me that
I thought you would have liked
that
Scarlet Street less.
You thought that I was going to like Big Heat more than Scarlet Street, when it turned out to be not only the exact opposite, but much more so on the extreme. Whereas this I thought was the weakest film, but Scarlet Street was tied for first for a while.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
It really is. And I think the like watching two Chris Lang films back to back like that and seeing how wildly different they both are, but still in the same genre and just like right next to each other like that is incredible, because it really shows this dynamic range of what this director was capable of.
Yeah, Fritz is a fucking genius. I love all of his work. But yeah, that's the big heap, which leaves one film. We were gonna try to sneak one more in, but I think having 5 films to discuss is fine.
Yeah.
So the last one we're gonna talk about is The Postman Always Rings Twice, which is a movie that you showed to me. I know. I know, more
right? Like, that's a little different.
I wanted to have more of you to show to me, but I think this worked out fine. I think that this was a solid, strong note to end on.
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
And I think you said you saw like a color version first?
The first time I saw this movie, it was in color. And it was not the 1986, I think it was 86. The 1980s remake. It was not that, because Betsy watched it with me. Betsy also remembers, for those of you at home who don't know, Betsy is my wife. When I watched this for my class, Betsy watched it with me. And we were both surprised that it was in color. And I don't know where I watched this. I think it was on one of those sites that we're not supposed to talk about. Nudge, nudge. Because it was a movie class and I had to like rapid watch these movies and shit, and that was the most reliable way to get to find them without, spending a fortune. And when we watched it, it was in color, and I was surprised because this was a noir class, and every film up to this point that I had watched that was noir was black and white.
Yeah.
So when you and I watched it, we watched the black and white version. But yes, when I watched this for my class 7 years ago, it was in color, but it worked all the same. Still very much noir.
Yeah, so I'm glad I finally got to watch it, because this has been on the list for a while. And it is a noir directed by Tay Garnett. That also stars Lana Turner. And we have John Garfield, Cecil Kellaway, who's got such a big bubbly face. but more akin to the plot. So Lana Turner plays Cora, and she's married to Nick, and he owns this diner. And Nick finds a drifter one day named Nick, who I'm sorry, did I say Nick? I meant to say Frank.
Yeah, Frank.
Nick finds this drifter named Frank on the road and decides to hire him because Nick needs help with his diner. And you see right off the bat, Frank doesn't care for much. He cares mostly for himself and his dick. And he just wants to breeze through life. He doesn't want to do much. He's a big old lazy bones. And once he lays eyes on Cora, he's like, oh, I want her. And so he starts making all these advances on her. And Nick,
he was really forward for the time. I got to admit, like,
yeah,
like there was this certain like unspoken rule that you just kind of really had to court before getting into the kissing and stuff. But like right off the bat.
Yeah, which is fucked up, because it's like this guy hires you, but doesn't know anything about you, and then you the first thing you're gonna do is try to grab his wife's ass. Like, that's like, Jesus Christ,
the fucking scumbag move.
So they end up getting into a little bit of an affair, and which at first I thought was gonna take longer, but Cora quickly starts getting charmed by the impulsiveness and aggressiveness of Frank's character, because Nick is just this straight-laced, boring dude. The most he does is he gets drunk off beer. He doesn't care for much else. I mean, he treats her great, but he's boring, and she wants some excitement and adventure. So in the beginning of the movie, they attempt to run off, and as they're doing this, Cora realizes, wait, I want to make something of myself, and we already own this diner, and I want my name on it, so I actually want to go back. So they end up going back, and there's this drunk altercation because Nick sees these suitcases. He's drunk as fuck. He comes back from his trip, and he starts accusing Frank of theft. And Cora quickly rushes in and says, "No, honey, you're drunk. It's not that at all. He was thinking about leaving. I told him he should stay. We'll just have to pay him more." So, wow, not only did you just try to fucking have an affair and ditch, but then you convince the other party involved to stay, and you're going to make your husband pay him more money. It's like, holy shit, like, you're a conniving bitch. So, anyway, then they start joking. They start doing the haha what if about killing Nick, which then turns into a reality because then they start to plan it out. And obviously this does not succeed because a fucking cat ends up getting frayed in a fuse box so Nick like drunkenly goes to shower, and the plan was Cora was going to sneak in and kill him. And the cat like frays the fucking fuse box, and I think
what
Nick
was she
ends
planning
up, like,
on actually doing? Did you catch it?
It's not really explained. I think she was just gonna like either bash him over the head or stab him or throw something in the tub, but he ends up like slipping and concussing, and he has to get rushed to the hospital. And when this happens, there is oh no, wait, I'm sorry. Am I Oh no, that's right. Okay, so this happens. Then you fast forward. They want to try to kill him again after they realize that Nick, his sister, is paralyzed, and he made arrangements to go live with her and bring Cora along, which basically means not only are you not going to be able to make a name for yourself or get away with Frank, but you're going to be set up with this life of just serving your husband and his sister for the rest of it. And she was like, all right, I want out immediately. And that's when they hatched the plan to kill him. So on the way, they all take the road trip to go to the sisters. But and interestingly enough, before that, one of the DA or one of the detectives rather, they come by to the crime scene and they're, well, not the crime scene, but where the accident happened. And at first you're like, oh, I guess they're just checking up, but it gets revealed very quickly that they were actually tailing them and they knew what was going on.
Right.
So when they take a detour to a lake, and I thought this was interesting because they put a lot of emphasis on the echoing, and that becomes an important part. And they have him in the car. He's drunk as fuck, so he's none the wiser. And they have a couple opportunities to do it. They don't do it yet. Then finally, Frank cracks him over the head with a bottle, which you obviously don't see. And then the plan is to careen the car over the cliff, have it sink, and whatever evidence was there will now be destroyed, and they'll pretend like they were in an accident. So basically, they go to do that, but Cora wasn't quick enough, and Frank ends up right,
self-report,
right, and Frank ends up stuck in the car, and as it goes down the cliff, he gets seriously injured. While this happens, Cora is screaming, but that detective catches up, and he's like, I don't, you're full of shit. Like, there's no way that this was an accident. So, cut to the hospital. Frank starts getting questioned by the detective, and he's like, listen,
the
I
DA,
know what happened.
Wasn't a detective.
I'm sorry, DA. That I had said that earlier, and I started thinking detective. the DA starts questioning him because he knows he's full of shit. And then he says, oh, well, if you legit, and he's like playing his hand. He's like, oh, if you legitimately didn't do it, then you have to write a complaint against Cora because she technically tried to murder you. So if you're innocent and you don't out her, you're going to look sus as fuck. So then it becomes this game of betrayal. And then there's like a lot of shitty shit happening, and Cora's attorney starts playing the field and saying, oh, I can get you guys off this, but you know, it's going to cost some money. And then from there, it just ends up with constant betrayal to all of the characters involved. And to the point
plan
where
kind of collapses in on itself.
It does. And at every turn you think, oh, well, it's bad now, and I wonder who is actually going to go down for it. Because towards the end of the movie, I was like, I don't know if Cora's going to die. I don't know if Frank's going to die. Like, what the fuck's going to happen? And sure enough, Cora is the one who dies by accident. And the tragic irony in that is that Frank was like, all right, well, I want to prove my actual love for you at this point. And now that Nick's gone, I can do that. And then they get into a fucking car accident and she dies. And he starts to get blamed for it, but then is alerted to the fact that, no, well, actually, Cora had wrote a note prior to her passing, basically like thanking you for your involvement in the plan of killing Nick. And which emotionally saved him because he was concerned. He's such a piece of shit. He was more concerned about Cora dying and having people believe it was him rather than the homicide that took place that he actually orchestrated. So at the end of the movie, there's this line where it's like, oh, he said it. He said the name of the movie. And he's talking about like ringing twice, but no postman.
Like literally,
about how it's
literally,
like, basically
when he's
like a
going
double
on
Jeopardy.
and on about that, I'm just every time I watch this movie, I'm just sitting here going, "What the fuck are you talking about? You're just babbling at this point."
Yeah, well, at that point he's delusional because he lost somebody really close to him, and he knew he was probably going to get the chair anyway, and that's basically how it ends. And this one was really fucked up, and I know to a lot of people it seems like a little bit of a simpler plot, but the amount of conspiring and the amount of betrayal and the amount of tragedy,
It's still a roller coaster.
It's still a roller coaster. And it's interesting if we want to talk about elements of noir. The use of lighting was interesting because they didn't use it in a conventional sense. They almost used the illumination to their advantage. Like there's a scene where Cora, Frank, and Nick are in the kitchen, or rather at a table in the house, and they're talking about how Nick is going to live with his sister and Cora's going to come along, and there's a constant like flickering on and off of the lights because at first he's like, I want to save the electric bill. Then he's like, I'm selling the place. Let the next asshole pay the electric bill because he got this place for cheap. And then
he's such a cheap. Like that was the thing about Nick, is that he's such a cheap bastard.
Yeah, but then Cora gets frustrated and immediately goes after Nick. And then there's just like this lovely light play it's very interesting the way that it is a noir, but it turns its head on some of those tropes and elements to get the point across of tragedy more so. So yeah, this one was super interesting. I had a really good time with it. I don't even know like what I was gonna think at first, but it certainly wasn't that. I was pleasantly surprised.
I'm really glad, because that one that's one that a lot of people always talk about, and I definitely feel it's worth the hype, but it's a solid noir. Like there's really not much else you could say about it. It is what's nice about it to me was it wasn't about money. It wasn't about power. It was very much about love, and that was the motive.
Yeah.
And also, out of all of the crimes that we saw committed in all of these movies, this one to me, at the very least, was the most understandable. I'm not saying excusable, but
Yeah.
I definitely get where Cora was coming from, because to waste your whole life caring for your husband and his invalid sister, like that's gonna be your life. Like, no hope, no dreams. That's it. Like, and I get it. She felt boxed into a corner.
Yeah, it is relatable in a sense.
It's that feeling of being backed into a corner, and you don't ever really want to know what an animal backed into a corner will do.
Yeah.
So
for sure.
definitely the most understandable and relatable of our I feel of our like protags, antagonists, like
anti-heroes,
like it's such an interesting there's such an interesting lack of terminology that exists for these characters. But yeah, I just think that her motive was the most understandable.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I was actually I really just wish I could find more information about the colorized version, because I was trying to you might have saw me on my phone a little bit earlier. I was trying to like Google more about it, and I can't find images, or I can't find anything on the colorized version, and I'm like, oh, that's fuck weird. Have I been Mandela'd?
Maybe, I don't know, but yeah, I'm pretty sure it exists.
I'm look, if I remember it and my wife remembers it, I would be more dubious if it was just me remembering it and she didn't. But we both remember this movie being in color, and that's what that's the thing that really surprises me, is because when I first watched it, it was really interesting to see how a noir could work with color.
Yeah,
and it still very much does. I mean, neo-noir and a lot of even modern day films and television series borrow aspects from noir, and it works very much so. Like, I think we might have touched on this like 2 years ago or so, but Breaking Bad borrows a ton of noir elements, and then there was Inception as well, which isn't a noir film, but it does borrow like certain aspects of neo-noir.
Yeah, I think Chinatown is probably the best example of how to do a modern day noir. I mean, it came out in the 70s, but still, like, that was past the noir period.
I feel like The Godfather is another good example, because there's a lot of that movie that is shot with a lot of shadow.
Yeah, I mean, and see, this is what I love about this conversation, is because there's so much you could put under the blanket of it. It's not just this or that. It could be a multitude of things.
Yeah. And that's really one of the craziest things, is that, like, you know, there are a lot of things that obviously aren't noir, but if noir had never existed, I feel like modern day movies, I feel like a lot of movies that came out after that period would be vastly different, because I feel like noir sort of helped shape and form and implement and introduce a lot of techniques and a lot of
for sure,
features into films that, like, if it weren't for that genre having existed when it did, movies would be wildly different. I mean, it almost feels like there was like an obsession with it in that time period, because you had so many movies made in that period, in that genre. I mean, if you look at Wikipedia, you look at a list of the film noirs that were made in that period, there's a ton of them. And so many different directors were all making these movies with these similar characteristics and aspects, that it was almost like there was an obsession with it. Like, that was it. Like, that was how to make a movie for that time period. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch here. List
goes on and on and on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it makes sense because it's stuck and it landed and it resonated so well with its audiences that they just kind of kept trying to replicate the same magic over and over. And I can't really blame the filmmakers for wanting to do that. And it all stems from, German film and French
German
film.
expressionism, right?
Exactly. And they all have this certain shooting style that's super unique to their culture and their class system that it's just one hell of a structure to their films, and that's why I'm so happy that it came over to the States and it's stuck. So that's my bit on film noir.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. I totally agree with you. I feel like noir is something that happened, and it happened for a reason, because I think it was definitely something new for the period of time, and it was a breath of fresh air for audiences. And they just, I mean, look at us in the year 2020, going back and watching these movies made in the 40s, and we're eating it up because they don't make them like that anymore, and they're really good. Like, there's just,
Yeah.
I think that's just the word that kind of it boils down to. It's really good. We don't fully understand why we love it so much, but I think it's really because we love seeing that darker side of humanity, and we just can't get enough of that. Like, for me, I never got tired of the genre. Every time I watched a movie, wrote a paper on it, I was happy to be doing it. It didn't feel like schoolwork to me. It felt like entertainment.
Right. Yeah. And it's so true. There's just so much to love about it. And that's why I can just gush, because I anytime I watch a new one, I think, oh, this is gonna be the same shit, but it's really never.
And that's what, and you know what? I feel like you're right there. I go into everyone thinking, all right, this is gonna be predictable. It's gonna be a guy and a woman, and the framework is predictable. That much is true. That's why it's called a genre, because there is a predictable framework there. But what happens within that framework, that spider web that unfolds, it's predictable in the sense that there is a spider web, but the pattern of the spider web is different, and that's why it's so delicious.
Exactly. That's perfectly put.
I guess, you know what? Film noir, I'll go with like this. Film noir is like pizza. You know it's going to be a pizza, but the toppings on the pizza are why you keep going back and trying new things.
Fair enough. I like it. And now I'm hungry for pizza. Fuck. Great. Every time. So, yeah, that was our 2020 Noirvember wrap up. I'm glad to always be discussing film like this with my good friend Anthony. And thank you for coming back on.
Of course. My pleasure. I couldn't wait to get back.
And we'll basically just do noir for the rest of the year. Fuck all other content.
God,
noir, baby.
Wouldn't that be great though? A year of noir. There's enough movies there to talk about.
That's when a dream bubble just pops in my head, and Edward G. Robinson just goes, Sergeant? Sergeant? Oh my god.
No, seriously, so Sam came over my house, right? He's in the bathroom, and I just run over to the door. Sergeant? Sergeant? And I just hear on the other side of the door, and it's like this laughter that I thought I had killed the man. It was great.
Well, the joke's on you because I painted the wall.
Oh
but
shit.
That is piss jokes are a beautiful way to end the show. So
yes, they are.
On that note, this has been the Silver Screen Fiends podcast. I've been your host, Sam. I've been joined once again by the illustrious, the incompetent, the
immaculate,
the immaculate.
Thank you,
Anthony. Yes.
It's been wonderful talking about this with you again. I'm always happy to talk about movies, TV shows, films, vidya. And I'm thinking, I really do want to explore this idea with you for next year I'm gonna put it out here in the episode. See if your fans have any thoughts on it. There is a video game called LA Noir, and I bounced the idea around this for this year, but we never got around to it. Maybe next year we could do a little collaboration.
Yeah, I would really like to check it out because that's a game that I've wanted to play, and I think it would fit with the theming very well.
I think it would
obviously.
fit with the theming very fucking well. All right,
Yeah,
so
definitely.
catch more of me on Retro Roulette. You can catch more of Sam on there too. He is my co-host.
Hey, cross promotion.
Yay! And then be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to silverscreenfiends. Is it .com or is it just Silver Screen Fiends?
It's actually .gov.edu.
.gov.edu/
Yeah.
.org.
Well, thanks for joining us.
Of course.
Once again.
You all have a wonderful night. Bye-bye.
Beans.
Pingus.
You suck. Sandra.
Sandra?
Sandra.
Sandra?
Sandra.